Listening section directions measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English. You will hear each conversation and lecture only one time. After each conversation or lecture, you will hear some questions about it. Answer all questions based on what the speakers state or imply. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Most questions have 4 possible answers. In some questions, you will see this icon. This means that you will hear but not see part of the question. Some questions have special directions which appear in a gray box. Most questions are worth 1 point. If a question is worth more than 1 point, special directions will indicate how many points you can receive. You have approximately 40 minutes to complete the listening section. This includes the time for listening to the conversations and lectures and for answering the questions. To make this practice more like the real test, cover the questions and answers during each conversation and lecture. When you hear the first question, uncover the questions and answers. Questions 1 through 5 between 2 students.
Oh, hi. It's good to see you. What's happening?
I'm busy with my classes. The quarter's going by really quickly. How about you? What have you been up to?
Busy with school and work. Hey, what are you taking spring quarter?
Literature, sociology, botany, and I'm hoping to do something in the arts, maybe some sort of work experience or internship.
No kidding. I didn't know you were artistic. What do you have in mind?
Well, there's this theater group I just found out about in Chester. I went to a couple of their plays. They're an interesting company. They perform a lot of new works, and they also do older plays that aren't very well known. And, well, I'm really impressed and would love to work with them in some way.
No kidding. I didn't know you were into theater. Do you act?
Not really.
Theater. Do you act?
Not really. I took drama in high school, but I was awful on stage. No, it's not acting that interests me as much as all the other stuff.
Like what? Directing? Lighting?
All of it, actually. This theater I told you about, they have the best sets. I'd like to build sets, or make costumes, find props, I don't know, even work in the office. It's the whole atmosphere of theater that I find exciting.
It sounds like you need to be a theater intern.
But as far as that goes, my problem is I don't know anything about setting it up.
What, the internship?
Yeah.
Do you know anyone who works there?
No, I only found out about it because I went to a couple of plays.
Better go see your advisor about this. Doesn't the advising department post a list of internships that are available?
Yeah, there's a list. I already checked it and there was nothing in theater. But I'll talk to Sherry, of course. She's my advisor.
You know what you could do? When I had to do an observation last year for my psychology class, we had to observe a work group for 2 weeks. What I did, how I got started, was I picked out a couple of law firms and then just sent formal letters of introduction. I told them I was a student and had to do a report for one of my classes and asked if I could meet with them to arrange an observation at their workplace.
Oh, really? And what happened?
I said I'd call them, and the first firm I called said I could do it there.
Wow! You make it sound so easy. I wonder if that'd work with the theater.
It's worth a try, isn't it?
It's worth a try. Hey, I'm glad I ran into you.
Number 1. What are the students mainly discussing? Number 2. What does the woman like about theater? Number 3. What is the woman's opinion of her own acting ability? Number 4. Why does the man say this?
Like what? Directing? Lighting?
Number 5. What does the man suggest the woman do? Questions 6 through 10, between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Reynolds.
Oh, hi, Jeff. I just read your note. You wanted to talk about something?
Yeah, just an idea I have. I've been thinking, I was reading about what's been going on with those houses on Fox Point.
You mean the slide?
Yeah, that's right. The paper said a few days ago there was only one house that was affected, but this morning there was another article saying there were lots more houses involved than they previously thought. Maybe as many as 15 or 20 homes. A couple of houses have big cracks in the foundation.
I read the article, too. It seems like nothing but bad news for the homeowners.
Yeah, my old boss lives out there on Fox Point. I don't know if his house is one that's affected. Anyway, I was sort of thinking I could write a paper on it. I remember how in your Intro to Geology course we studied gravity movements. I thought maybe the slide on Fox Point was a case of subsidence. When the Earth sinks because there's a weakening of support, I was thinking this might be an example of settlement.
Settlement happens from the more or less gradual compacting of underlying material. For example, when wet soil at the surface dries and shrinks and creates a depression. It can also happen when frozen ground melts.
In class, you talked about the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Yes, the settlement that's caused the Tower of Pisa to lean is due to the failure of a clay layer beneath it. Engineers have been working on it for decades, but still haven't been able to stop the process.
There was another kind of settlement you talked about, when groundwater's removed.
Yes, that's what happened in the San Joaquin Valley in California. Part of the valley floor sank 30 feet because of the removal of groundwater for irrigation. But the problem on Fox Point may not be subsidence at all. This probably has more to do with the slope and with the amount of rain we've been having lately.
So it's just a regular old mudslide, not like the Leaning Tower?
It's probably not like the Leaning Tower.
The article did say the houses were on a slope, but it's only slight. It's not steep at all.
Mudslides are most common on intermediate slopes, 27 to 45 degrees, because these slopes are gentle enough for sediment to accumulate and steep enough for sliding. One suggestion I have is to take a look at the county's website. There's a page on the geology of the region. This area has a history of slides. There was one on Johnson Island about 10, 12 years ago.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Maybe there's a connection.
Possibly. It's an idea to work on.
Well, this gives me a place to start. Thanks, Professor Reynolds. I appreciate your input.
Number 6. Why does the student go to see the professor? Number 7. What topic is the man mainly interested in? Number 8. Why does the student say this?
In class, you talked about the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Number 9. According to the professor, where are mudslides most common? Number 10. What will the man probably include in his research? Questions 11 through 6 are part of a discussion in a botany class. The class is talking about flowers.
In a perfect idealized flower, its 4 organs are arranged in 4 whorls, all attached to the receptacle at the end of the stem. Before we go on, let's quickly go over the 4 parts of the flower. First, let's start from the outside and work in. Which organ is on the outside, closest to the stem?
The sepal. That's the part that kind of looks like a leaf because it's usually green. The sepal protects the flower bud before it opens up.
Right. Then what comes next?
The petals, the colorful part of the flower. It's the petals that make the flower attractive to insects and birds, and people too.
Right. And inside the petal layers we have
The flower's
the
flower's reproductive parts, the stamens and carpels.
That's right. So we have the four parts of a flower: sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels. Now, during the millions of years in the history of flowering plants, numerous variations evolved. In certain flowers, one or more of the four basic floral organs, sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels, have been eliminated. Plant biologists distinguish between complete flowers, those with all four organs, and incomplete flowers, those lacking one or more of the four floral parts. For example, most grasses have incomplete flowers that lack petals. There are many variations in the size, shape, and color of flowers. One important element in plant classification is the arrangement of flowers on their stalks. The large composite family, for example, which includes asters, daisies, and sunflowers, have flower heads that form a central disc. What appears to be a single flower is actually a collection of hundreds of flowers. The central disc consists of tiny, complete flowers. And what appear to be petals surrounding the central disc are actually imperfect flowers called ray flowers.
I'm not sure I got that. Could you say that again?
Sure. The flower head, the center part of the plant, actually consists of many tiny, tightly packed, complete flowers that stand upright on a flat disc. The whole arrangement looks like a single symmetrical flower, but it's actually a collection of hundreds of separate flowers. The petals, what look like petals, are actually larger flowers called rays that extend from the rim of the disc. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess so. What you're saying is a single sunflower is really hundreds of flowers put together.
That's right. This will make more sense in the lab this afternoon. So, in the composite family, there are about 19,000 different species worldwide. Many are grown as ornamentals: cosmos, zinnia, dahlia, marigold, and aster. Probably the most recognized composite flower is the English daisy. The daisy was introduced from Europe and now is a wildflower found on lawns, in fields, and at roadsides throughout North America. The name of the daisy has an interesting origin. The word daisy means day's eye and comes from an older Anglo-Saxon word. The English daisy folds up its rays at night and unfolds them again at dawn, the eye of the day, or day's eye. Several cultivated varieties of English daisy are popular as edging plants or in rock gardens. The English daisy comes in lots of colors: rose, lavender, pink, and white. It has a long bloom time from April to September. The plants are compact and attractive, with flower heads up to 2 inches across. In the lab, we'll be looking at some different varieties of the daisy, and you'll see for yourself why they're so popular.
Number 11. What aspects of flowers does the class mainly discuss? Number 12. Which part of the flower attracts insects and birds? Number 13. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
The whole arrangement looks like a single symmetrical flower, but it's actually a collection of hundreds of separate flowers. The petals, what look like petals, are actually larger flowers called rays that extend from the rim of the disc. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess so. What you're saying is a single sunflower is really hundreds of flowers put together.
That's right. This will make more sense in the lab this afternoon.
Why does the professor say this?
This will make more sense in the lab this afternoon.
Number 14. Select the drawing that is most likely a member of the composite family. Number 15. Based on the information in the discussion, Indicate whether each statement below is true or not true. Number 16. According to the professor, how did the daisy get its name? Questions 17 through 20 lecture in an anthropology class.
Every human society has developed some interest in activities that could be considered sports. The more complex the culture, the more various the range of sporting behavior. There are certain elements in all human sports that are clues to the common underlying structure of sports. Sports tell us a great deal about the kinds of behavior that our prehistoric ancestors evolved, activities that were basic survival skills. Now, let me ask you, what skills were most important to the survival of our ancestors? Yes, Lynn?
The ability to find food?
Yeah, but what skills were necessary to find food?
Good eyesight?
Okay, what else?
Well, if they were hunters, they also had to be fast runners, and they had to have good eyes and a good arm, a good aim, so they could kill game.
Yes, and isn't it interesting that you just used the word game? Our prehistoric ancestors were gamers. They hunted game animals to survive. Look at the number of sports that originated in hunting. First, hunting itself, but for some societies, the ancient pattern of killing prey is kept alive in the form of blood sports. These are sports that involve the killing of an animal. Even in places where the killing is no longer a matter of survival, it still survives as a sport. The animals, like ducks or pheasant, certain fish, are often eaten as luxury foods. It's the personal sense of mastery, the sort of delight in the skills of the hunter. These are more important than the food itself. For our prehistoric ancestors, the climax of the hunt was always a group celebration with songs of praise for the hunters. As hunting sort of became more symbolic, spectators became more important. The ancient Romans brought the hunt to the people by confining it to an arena, the Colosseum. The Colosseum made the hunting field smaller, and this sort of intensified the activity for the entertainment of the spectators. The systematic killing of animals for sport still survives in parts of the world today. Think of bullfights and cockfights. But animal sports are only part of the picture. Today, people find human competition more satisfying than competition involving just animals. Take track and field sports. These don't involve animals, but they did originate in hunting. The earliest sports meetings, or meets as we call them, were probably ritualized competitions of important skills. Think of how many Olympic sports there are that involve aiming, throwing, and running, which are all hunting skills. The difference is that now the hunting has become totally symbolic. In some sports, there's still a strong symbolic element of the kill. Wrestling, boxing, fencing, martial arts, all these are examples of ritualized fighting. Even tennis is kind of a fight, of course an abstract one. There are lots of direct references to fighting in the language of sports too. For example, what do soccer and chess players do? They attack or defend. Today, even the most violent fighting sports have strict rules that are designed to prevent serious injury. There's also some kind of referee to make sure that the rules are observed. In sports, the objective is victory, not the actual destruction of your opponent. Another objective is to impress and entertain the spectators, not to shock or offend them. Because sports contain such a powerful negative element, most have an ideal of acceptable behavior, something we call sportsmanship. There's also a universal convention in sports where the winner honors the defeated opponent with a handshake, with words of praise, or some token of respect.
Number 17. What is the main idea of the lecture? Number 18. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Now, let me ask you, what skills were most important to the survival of our ancestors? Yes, Lynn?
The ability to find food?
Yeah, but what skills were necessary to find food?
Why does the professor say this?
Yeah, but what skills were necessary to find food?
Number 19. According to the professor, why did the ancient Romans build the Colosseum? Number 20. What point does the professor make about track and field sports? Number 21. Which sports contain a symbolic element of the kill? Number 22. What does the professor imply about the negative element of sports? Questions 23 through 20. An epidemiologist has been invited to speak to students in a public health class. Listen to part of the talk.
Epidemiology is the field of medicine that deals with epidemics, outbreaks of disease that affect large numbers of people. As an epidemiologist, I look at factors involved in the distribution and frequency of disease in human populations. For example, what is it about what we do, or what we eat, or what our environment is, that leads one group of people to be more likely, or less likely, to develop a disease than another group of people? It's these factors that we try to identify. We use statistical analyses, field investigations, and a range of laboratory techniques. We try to determine the cause and distribution of a disease. We also look at how quickly the disease spreads, and by what method, so we can implement measures to control and prevent the disease. Some epidemiologists concentrate on communicable diseases, like tuberculosis and AIDS. Others focus on the growing epidemics in cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. We gather data in a variety of ways. One way is through what we call descriptive epidemiology, or looking at the trends of diseases over time, as well as trends of diseases in one population relative to another. Statistics are important in descriptive epidemiology because numbers are a useful way to simplify information. A second approach is observational epidemiology, where we observe what people do. We take a group of people who have a disease and a group of people who don't have a disease. We look at their patterns of eating or drinking and their medical history. We also take a group of people who've been exposed to something, for example, smoking, and a group of people who haven't, and then observe them over time to see whether they develop a disease or not. In observational epidemiology, we don't interfere in the process. We just observe it. A third approach is experimental epidemiology, sometimes called an intervention study. Experimental research is the best way to establish cause and effect relationships between variables. A typical experiment studies two groups of subjects. One group receives a treatment, and the other group, the control group, does not. Thus, the effectiveness of the treatment can be determined. Experimental research is the only type of research that directly attempts to influence a particular variable, called the treatment variable, as a way to test a hypothesis about cause and effect. Some examples of treatments that can be varied include the amount of iron or potassium in the diet, the amount or type of exercise one engages in per week, and the minutes of sunlight one is exposed to per day. The Health Research Institute, of which I am the director, is mostly involved in experimental studies. I say mostly because we study treatment and non-treatment groups and then compare the outcomes. However, we do collect and study various types of data in any given year. From these different approaches, descriptive, observational, and experimental, we can judge whether a particular factor causes or prevents the disease that we're looking at.
Number 23. What is the talk mainly about? Number 24. What factors do epidemiologists study? Numbers 25 and 26. Based on the information in the talk, indicate whether each sentence below describes descriptive, observational, or experimental epidemiology. Number 27. Why do epidemiologists often study two groups of people? Number 28. Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question.
The Health Research Institute, of which I am the director, is mostly involved in experimental studies. I say mostly because we study treatment and non-treatment groups and then compare the outcomes. However, we do collect and study various types of data in any given year. From these different approaches, descriptive, observational, and experimental, we can judge whether a particular factor causes or prevents the disease that we're looking at.
Why does the speaker talk about her own work? Questions 29 through 30, part of a talk in a music education class.
Learning to play a musical instrument is one of the best experiences that a young child can have. Learning to play music begins with listening to others play music. A child's first experience with playing an instrument should be by ear, without the distraction of printed music. Playing by ear is the natural beginning for children. The ability to play by ear will help them throughout their lives, and it also enriches the experience of music making. But children should eventually learn to read music. So, when is the right time? And what's the best way for a child to learn how to read music? A lot of children start playing an instrument at the age of 8 or 9. It's best for them to spend a couple of years playing by ear before the teacher introduces notation, printed music. Children should first be able to feel that their instrument is a part of them. Playing by ear is the best way for children to become comfortable with their instrument. The teacher should introduce notation only when the child is ready. The right time is when the child feels a need for notation. This might be when the child has learned so many pieces it's sort of difficult to remember them all. Then the teacher can present the printed music as a memory aid. So learning to read music has a practical purpose and isn't just a meaningless task. A good time to teach notation is when a group of children play together. The printed score is a way to help them sort of keep track of who plays what and when. The score will organize their cooperative effort in a way that makes sense to them. Another good time is when the child wants to play music that's so complex it would be difficult to learn by ear. In this case, learning to read music is a natural step toward playing the music the child wants to play. The teacher should play the score for the child the first time through, and demonstrate how the notes on the page are transformed into music. The child listens as he or she looks at the printed notes. This way, the child can begin to see how the notes represent sound, and a printed score becomes a piece of music. As the child listens and maybe plays along, he or she begins to understand the shape of the new piece. For students who play a chord-producing instrument, the guitar for example, a natural first step toward reading music is playing by chord symbols. Chord symbols are found in a lot of different styles of music, like pop and jazz, and at various levels of difficulty. Chord symbols are a simple form of written music. They're kind of a halfway point between playing by ear and reading a standard musical score. After children can play by ear and then by chord symbols, the next step is to read standard music notation. Although that's the natural order for children to learn, it doesn't mean that each successive step is better than the one that came before. The three methods of playing music, playing by ear, playing chords, and playing by standard notation are all valuable in their own way. Some children will always prefer to play by ear. Others will like chord playing and have no desire to learn another method. And still others will find their musical home in the tradition of note reading. It's the job of the music teacher to fit the method to the needs of the students.
Number 29. What is playing by ear? Number 30. Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question.
Playing by ear is the natural beginning for children. The ability to play by ear will help them throughout their lives, and it also enriches the experience of music making. But children should eventually learn to read music. So, when is the right time? And what's the best way for a child to learn how to read music?
Why does the professor ask this?
So, when is the right time? And what's the best way for a child to learn how to read music?
Number 31. According to the professor, when should children learn to read musical notation? Number 32. According to the professor, why should a music teacher play the score for a child the first time? Number 33. According to the professor, what is the natural order for children to learn music? Number 34. What does the professor imply about the three methods of playing music? Speaking section direction. Speaking section measures your ability to speak in English about a variety of topics. There are 6 questions in this section. Record your response to each question on a cassette. Questions 1 and 2 are independent speaking tasks in which you will speak about familiar topics. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently about the topics. Questions 3 and 4 are integrated tasks in which you will read a passage, listen to a conversation or lecture, and then speak in response to a question about what you have read and heard. You will need to combine relevant information from the 2 sources to answer the question completely. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently, and on your ability to accurately convey information about what you read and heard. Questions 5 and 6 are integrated tasks, in which you will listen to part of a conversation or lecture, and then speak in response to a question about what you have heard. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently, and on your ability to accurately convey information about what you heard. You will hear each conversation and lecture only one time. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Describe a person who is influenced. Explain why this person has had an effect on your life. Include details and examples in your explanation. Some people get most of their news, others read the newspaper. Which source of news do you think is better, and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. Now listen to two students.
It looks like we'll be in the same biology class. I'm going to miss the first day because I won't be back from vacation yet, so I'll ask you for the lecture notes.
But you can't miss the first day. Attendance is mandatory on the first day.
Oh, I don't agree with that. It'll be all right. That policy is unfair anyway.
It's not unfair. The instructor has the right to set the attendance policy and the right to kick you out of class if you don't follow it. The way I look at it, if the instructor has to be there every day, then so should the students. That seems fair to me.
Oh, but the students can read and study on their own. It's not important to go to class. The only thing that's important is the examinations.
I disagree. I think it's important to participate in class. That's an important part of learning.
But you can learn what you need to know by studying on your own.
But how do you know you won't miss something important? You can't always understand everything on your own. That's why you need to go to class. And that's why there's an attendance policy.
The woman expresses her opinion about the attendance policy. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a lecture on this class.
One ethical problem with participant observation is that researchers usually come from social backgrounds very different from those of the people they're studying. So they have to be dishonest about the reason for being there. They may have to lie about who they are. For example, in one study, a researcher wanted to study fast food workers, so she got a job in a fast food restaurant. She changed her name and lied about her work history and pretended not to have a university education. This is where the ethical problem starts. To complicate matters, the researcher used other people's acceptance of her lies in order to advance her own career. She was pretending to be someone else, a fast food worker, to write a book about the experience. So, she was basically using other people without their knowledge or permission. One solution to the problem is to be honest about who you really are. However, this might influence the results of the study because people might not act naturally if they know they're being observed. Another acceptable solution is to tell everyone as soon as possible after the project is completed. That's what our fast food researcher did. At the end of the study, she told the other workers that she was writing a book about them in order to get their approval to tell their stories.
Explain the ethical problem in the participant observation study discussed in the lecture. State what the researcher did to solve the problem and explain why this was acceptable. Now listen to a conversation between...
So, are you doing the internship at the bank next semester?
Maybe. I'll be doing an internship anyway. My parents want me to take the bank internship because they want me to go into banking. But Dr. Kim has asked me to be her intern. She's doing a study of population growth and wants me to help her. I'd rather work on the population study, but I don't want to disappoint my parents either.
Do you want your career to be in banking?
At one time, I thought I did, but now I'm much more excited about the idea of working with statistics, doing pure research.
Then you should do the internship with Dr. Kim on the population study. That way you'll know for sure if pure research is what you want to do with your life.
My father won't be happy about that.
How do you know? Talk to him. Tell him why the population project excites you. The population project excites you. Tell him it's a great opportunity to work with Dr. Kim and quite an honor for a professor to ask you like this. That might actually please your father. But in the end, you have to do what makes you happy.
Describe the man's problem and the suggestions the woman makes about what he should do. What do you think the man should do, and why? Now listen to part of a talk in a biologist is discussing competition in bird populations.
Competition is the struggle among birds for resources. Whenever there's a limited supply of a resource, such as food, nest sites, or mates, there'll be competition. Competition can take place between birds of the same species or between birds of different species. There are a couple of forms of competition, direct and indirect. Direct competition is when a bird actively excludes others from getting resources. A common example is stealing. A bird may simply take food from another. Another example is territories. Especially during the breeding season, birds maintain and defend some sort of territory. They form territories to defend resources, like food or to maintain access to good nest sites or to attract mates. Some birds compete directly by fighting, for example, when they compete for mates. Others fight over food. You can see this if you watch gulls feeding on the garbage at the local garbage dump. And the second type of competition is indirect competition, when birds simply use up a resource. When one species eats all the seeds or berries or grubs, this will prevent other species from using that resource. Indirect competition is less open than direct competition, but it can have just as great an influence on populations. For example, a flock of geese grazing in a field will gradually decrease the amount of food there. The larger the flock, the faster the food will be used up, and this reduces the amount of food available to other species. Competition determines the size of bird populations. As the population of a species increases in a particular area, the likelihood of competition also increases. Eventually, competition may limit the size of the population because there's simply not enough food and nest sites for more birds.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain the two types of competition in bird populations. Then explain how population size and competition are related. Writing section directions. Measures your ability to use writing to communicate in an academic environment. There are 2 writing questions. Question 1 is an integrated writing task. You will read a passage, listen to a lecture, and then answer a question based on what you have read and heard. You have 20 minutes to plan and write your response. Question 2 is an independent writing task. You will answer a question based on your own knowledge and experience. You have 30 minutes to plan and write your response. Now listen to part of a lecture.
Now I'd like to tell you about a famous study that points to some of the more troubling aspects of same-age peer groups. It's known as the Robbers Cave Experiment, and it looked at a group of 22 normal 11-year-old boys. All of the boys had similar social, economic, and educational backgrounds. The boys were taken to a summer camp in Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. The study took place in 3 stages. In the first stage, which lasted 1 week, the boys were randomly divided into 2 groups. In this stage, competition was discouraged, and there were joint activities. But the 2 groups nevertheless began to show signs of feeling competitive. For example, they named themselves the Eagles, and the Rattlers, and they began to tease and belittle each other. In the second stage, a series of contests was set up between the 2 groups: baseball, tug-of-war, skits, treasure hunts, and even cabin inspections. There were prizes for the winners, like medals and camp knives, After the second day, there was an increase in name-calling and insults between the two groups, to the point that the negative attitudes became very clearly defined. Then, in the third stage of the study, the two groups were put back together again. They were given important goals to reach together, such as fixing the water tank, so all the boys would have water to drink. This project greatly reduced prejudice in just a few days. By the end of stage 3, most of the conflict between the groups had disappeared. So, what does this experiment tell us? Well, for one thing, dividing boys into two groups can easily lead to prejudice and insults between the groups. Also, when the two rival groups are given a cooperative task, like fixing the water tank, they can put away their differences and get the job done. The experiment shows that, in peer groups, competition comes more naturally than cooperation. And we have to wonder, without the supervision of adults, would competition, teasing, and negative attitudes get even more extreme?
Summarize the points made by the professor about same-age peer groups, explaining how they cast doubt on points made in the reading.